That's why some things that are tried and true are good. Family values, taking responsibility for your own actions, and these guys would try to, come up with 20 PhDs who will tell you why this young kid stabbed the girl at Columbia University,
Yeah.
They'll bring up 20 excuses.
Right. Right.
Maybe the kid was just an evil bastard,
Right.
You know what I mean? But no, but it's true. But they overanalyze because that's academia, right?
No, so what are we talking about? Are we talking about the elite schools versus the non?
Yeah, and I guess common sense is gone with these elitists. I mean, as you know, there's so many different words that they're using and terminology for various things.
Yeah.
Microaggression, cultural appropriation. Cultural, what is it? Approbation?
Appropriation,
right. I heard someone say this yesterday, and it's like,
I
looked it up, and it's basically, if you are non-European, I guess, I don't know, maybe if you're Italian, that's European, right?
Yeah.
I still don't understand how Latins could say that they're not European when they're speaking Spanish, but whatever.
And what's that behind you, by the way? Is that G.I. Joe or something else?
I just told you, Bruce Lee.
Which one? Oh, right. Oh, it looks like the $6 Million Man, with the bionic eye and all that stuff, man.
And that's actually Dr. Strange. Hard to see.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, this is old school. I like this.
Yeah, but
you're covering cap, though. Can you move over, man? Show a little respect.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right. These questions, they just throw out new language. However, they could, confuse.
Yeah.
For example, this whole new push in the 70s by the academics that were French, right? They were pro-communist, and then they found out that communism was an abject failure.
Yeah, that's my Yoko Ono behind me from France.
Yeah, then they pushed to this new progressivism. What do you want? Derua, and I forget the other lady's name. They pushed.
Derua.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Durua. Okay. So they pushed this whole new look on Western culture, how Western culture was offensive to all, how there's just the hierarchy with the patriarch dominating and no one else could get ahead.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing pushed today. So
have you been following Rand Paul's book on socialism?
No, I have not.
I think we need to review that. I think that's quite important.
I would love to.
In the context of the debates that are happening now, because, inequality, right? That's what we're saying. Inequality and political liberty and free enterprise, they're all on trial here. And that's what the 2020 election is all about, isn't it, in the end? So,
I think it's deeper than that, as you brought up to my attention. This is truly a war. It's a war between Western values, capitalism, Judeo-Christian values, and
I said more than that. I said it's a holy war because it's war based on certain beliefs that people have and the identities that people vest in certain beliefs. But we'll get into that later. But I think we should. I think actually one of the purposes of this podcast is to just actually cast light on certain concepts that seem to be in the public forum, right? To see what makes sense from what doesn't, and let's try to be as objective as possible in the course of actually teasing out some of these concepts. So I think we began actually like a podcast. Maybe we should talk about all the troubles we've been having for about 10 months to get this off the air.
You think someone's sabotaging us, right?
Yeah, I think the dark side. I think evil is trying to sabotage us. It's trying to stop us, and maybe those on Earth who actually might be aligned with them are trying to stop us. But let's not get too conspiratorial here.
Well, you might have some validity there with your post on YouTube. Your commentary.
Yeah, so I've been posting for about, a year and a half now, and I think I've been pretty active and I think pretty important out there, at least in the YouTube community in terms of setting the story straight. Haven't been trolling all that much, maybe not at all. I respond nicely, I'm a nice counterpuncher, the way that our president is.
That's what I know.
And our good members, we're all up from the Bronx. Just about every player that I've seen here, okay, from the Mueller report to both sides of the aisle, including certain persons in the White House, from Trump and Giuliani on down, a lot of them Oh my God, Comey as well too. They're around. They've been educated in the Bronx. Brennan is another one. Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable. Just take a good look. And they're educated either in the Bronx or like just across the border, right? Like in the case of Comey, right? It's unbelievable. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and you know.
Oh, Michael Voorhees, another one from Yonkers. He's
He
here.
studied in the seminary.
Yonkers as well.
Michael Savage, Bronx guy.
Oh my
He's
goodness.
been fighting this fight for a long time.
Yeah, so we call this podcast Winston for very, very obvious reasons, or maybe some not so obvious, but I guess it'll become more obvious as we come along. Yep.
Mother was from Brooklyn.
Yeah, we were thinking about calling this podcast Bronx Boys. Yeah, because both of us are up from the Bronx, two cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah. One, you know, lost in translation in Paris. The other one, you know, back in the boogie down. Where are you right now? In Harlem, right?
Oh, no, right today I'm in the Bronx. I'm like in Riverdale, King.
All right. So, you know, you're feeling the vibe there, man. That's good. But anyway, I think that the purpose of this is to just to illuminate certain concepts that people seem to get wrong, at least in the beginning, you know. And look, I'm happy to go where concepts lead us. All right. And so today, we're dealing with the question of equality, right? Which seems to be the primary question, the primary thrust that at least the political, and actually both parties, you know, seem to, right? It seems to both parties, you know, some may put more of an emphasis or primacy on questions of liberty, the other one on the questions of equality, but no one can deny equality as one of the two primary goals of any polity, of any political arrangement, right? And so I'm just saying, so we had, oh man, I don't know if you want to go through a list of bad things that have happened to us, including a podcast that we had on equality that went on for about an hour and a half, and for some magical reason, Zoom didn't capture the video component, which is weird. It's inexplicable.
Yeah,
and I've been debating on YouTube for the last couple of weeks, and I've noticed they shadow banned me. Okay, which I think is in my case that, you know, so my screen shows me that actually I posted something on YouTube, and I try to really clarify the record on what comes out of CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Okay, breaks my heart to say this because I used to, for example, vest so much of my trust in the New York Times. Not completely, of course, but I'm a New Yorker too. Maybe that was part of it. But I thought I had so much respect for the New Yorker and New York Times and the Washington Post, but goodness, boy, have they taken the trust that people have had in them. The New York Review of Books is another one, and they've just destroyed it. Okay, for the sake of
the question is, have they always been this left, or have they always tried to deceive us, or have they gotten worse?
I don't know.
The Democratic Party.
All I know is I pray, and we're good Catholics here, at least we're trying to be. I just pray that the internet keeps open and that the censorship that I'm facing, doesn't reach most of us.
Right.
I just pray. I pray actually Donald Trump. The best thing he probably can do at this point in history, if he really cares, would be to use a good portion of his wealth, $2 billion to establish an alternative, as you say, to YouTube. Okay, something that not as conservative per se, but is just open to debate. The marketplace of ideas.
Well, have it open. Have it open.
But that's what I'm saying.
Like what we consider free speech.
If I had the money, that would be the greatest investment anyone could possibly do. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know why, or if they are. This administration is going to investigate YouTube or Google. Or I don't know, all these Facebook, let's say, because it's so obvious. I mean, from my limited unscientific knowledge, that they are banning conservatives.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
That's factual, and I don't see them banning leftists.
No.
I haven't heard any ban, whatever you want to call them, on Farrakhan.
Well, let me just say what a shadow ban is in my case. So I've been debating with certain people in a very odd way. I mean, it's more like a troll, not really a debate. You're stupid and stuff like that. I can handle myself. But I mean, they just do their best to actually knock you down and to waste your energy, and that's what happened with me. And I'm debating with certain people, trying to be serious. In the hope, at least, that actually anyone who actually reads that thread would actually see the line of logic and actually would see that actually I'm on the right side of some of these issues. Okay. For goodness sake. And then I realized when I switched to another computer, that actually my comments don't appear. So that's
all of them.
No, just don't appear whatsoever. So I don't know what that really means. It seems to me that actually they're deceiving me in me believing that actually I'm actually, that my arguments are actually being recorded. And but I'm obviously arguing with someone, so I'm wondering actually the persons who shadow banned me are just pulling my leg, and they're actually trolling me. But none of that is being actually put in the public space.
Well, I've told you this happens. Definitely happens, and it might be in your case. For example, once again, I am not saying I'm an oracle, and I'm, talking about things that are unheard of and very important, but I see it happening on Facebook. It's like I've seen it happen, like fake posts, it seems. People who are just so pro-Obama with a beautiful, 5-line paragraph on why he's the best, beyond reproach. Now, any intellectual, any person with half a brain, I mean, he's an individual, Obama, so is Trump, but they're almost calling Obama like he's, Christ.
The Messiah. But fair enough. I think actually there are certain portions of the right that actually do the same for people like Trump. So we have to stop.
It's probably happening on both sides. But what concerns me is the banning of conservative talk. Okay? Basically, conservative talk would be to say you're concerned about crimes that are occurring in communities that don't reflect or that aren't an indictment of white America. I mean, if you say that, then it's shaming, or, it's Islamophobia if you talk about stabbings in England. But it's okay to, advertise or put a light under a European man or an American white who kills somebody. Then, we haven't heard much about the coverage about the shooting in New Jersey, in Jersey City. I mean, it's almost like there's some articles on it that made excuses for some of the killers,
No, I think it's been silenced, actually.
They'll do that as well.
Same thing with the report. What is it? The report of the Pentagon on the war in Afghanistan, and how it's just been a tremendous loss of money and a tremendous loss of lives. It's the longest war we've ever been a part of, and we got almost nothing out of it, and we never will. Okay, so it's a quagmire that all logic in the world, suggests we should get out and get out quickly. Okay, and cut our losses, right, before more Americans are killed. So I mean, there's some wonderful logic in what actually Rand Paul and Donald Trump are saying about being entangled in these foreign and these dubious battles.
I mean, as
thousands of miles away from U.S. borders, right?
Everyone goes back to Eisenhower. I mean, it makes sense. Beware of the military-industrial complex. That makes sense. You wonder why we in Afghanistan for 20 years or more. Right? What is the objective? Vietnam, what was the objective? I mean, if we wanted to win, we could have won. Not saying to drop the bomb, but if we wanted to. We knew Russia and China were involved, of course, funding our enemies. But war makes money, unfortunately. I don't think it's that simple, but even Kennedy's Secretary of Defense even said that. McNamara, in his documentary Fog of War, he knew we couldn't win the war because our hands were tied and there were restrictions, but he kept sending in troops, and he said that's something he regrets. That was in the documentary.
Of course. Hey, you want to jump into Thomas Sowell's book while we can?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about him the first hour that we recorded. Fantastic book. Actually, it's so much information, and it's such it's short. It's like 220 pages, but it's like factual. So it's hard to really embrace it since I don't have my slides. Here it is. But can you see it?
Yeah, sure.
Discrimination and Disparities, Thomas Sowell.
We're very high tech, as you can see. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, discrimination.
Well, it's better than the last time. You were reading your notes off the ceilings. It was kind of funny, man.
Well, now I'm going to read them straight ahead.
It's good. It's good.
No, you know why I have
you got to position notes behind the camera so it looks like it's all coming from your head. That's the way.
Oh, no.
Yeah. That's the way good podcasters do it, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Well, YouTubers.
We'll get there. I mean, I have Bruce Lee here, Captain America, and Doctor Strange.
Who's missing?
The reason why I have to read a lot, because these are significant quotes from the book.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could just expand on some of these examples that he has, but, you want to be reading some of these quotes. So, discrimination and disparities, we covered probably the first 20 pages for the first hour. And Sowell talks about the origins, I'm reading now, of economic disparities. And he says, this is a quote, this edition takes on the non sequitur, underlying the prevailing social vision of our time. Namely, that if individual benefits are not due solely to individual merit, there is justification for politicians to redistribute those benefits, as you've been saying. So that is the question. Redistributing benefits. You can't even read that there. So many would argue, I guess, that there has been a redistribution of benefits. And what are the results? I'm not saying Sowell said this. I'm saying this. I mean, top 1% are taxed 50%. People pay 50% in taxes. We talked about the war on poverty and the trillions of dollars spent on the war on poverty. What are the results? We'll go into that later. But then Sowell talks about the foundations of the prevailing vision. And this is one of your guys that you studied, Rousseau. He says, at the heart of the prevailing social vision, excuse me, let me go to this. The essence of invincible fallacy was best expressed by Rousseau in the 18th century when he wrote of the equality which nature established among men and the inequality which they have instituted among themselves. But nature, in the form of geographic isolation, doomed whole peoples to lagging. This is Sowell. The centuries or even millennia behind the progress of the rest of the world. So Sowell even goes into the advantages people have being born on the West Coast or the East Coast. The advantages are very obvious. These places have ports. There'll be an exchange of ideas and goods, and they have an advantage.
Right. Well, that's not the issue, I think. It's not the issue.
No, I'm just giving you one.
But I guess the issue is not whether people are born with certain advantages. Everyone is. No one is born perfectly equal. Even if you have identical twins, it seems to me...
Which we discussed.
Yeah, it seems to me that actually one might have a certain advantage over the other because they're not perfectly identical, I would hope. That humanity is more varied than that, right? More complex, more wonderfully diverse than that. And so, even with identical twins, there might be a difference in the choices that those twins make, for example. Right. And then the question would be, why shouldn't people benefit from the choices that they make, especially those which are reasonable versus unreasonable? If they're reasonable, one would expect one to do better in a marketplace, and unreasonable, that people would do worse. By the way, we shouldn't even talk simply in terms of money. That's actually a very narrow way. That's what I don't like about economists. They tend to, well, maybe I'm wrong about that, okay? But most economists, or many economists, seem to only talk in terms of money. But we should also talk in terms of the general welfare of people, which, and then we could beg the question whether people who are richer fare better than those who are middle, okay? Even those who are, even lower middle. Maybe they have in the grand scheme of things, a greater welfare than those at the top. For example, the amount of camaraderie and love that one sees amongst oneself. My beautiful wife here in Paris, she talks about, what is it, the Bentocourt family, those who own L'Oreal and Yves Rocher and all these great French companies. And once a wealth is made, let me tell you, man, the relatives, the children in particular, the next generation, they fight like cats and dogs, and they destroy any semblance of love between them, just to pick the bones, of those who built up the wealth. Right?
Well, yeah,
it's terrible.
Isn't that a sign of rich countries? That happens all the time. The first generation, a grandfather, comes from nothing, gives up everything to create an empire, and his son takes it over. Might appreciate it a little more.
May maintain it.
And it might be lost in the third generation.
Yeah, the third one wastes it. That's still good what they said. All right, but the point is that not that actually, well, I mean, come on, it's a simple thing to say that actually we are born differently. That individuals are born differently, peoples of different cultures are different by definition. That's why we call it culture. People of different countries are situated differently. And in terms of resources, at least we can say that they all have certain advantages, and maybe they have an equality of advantages and equality of disadvantages if you look at it in the grandest possible way. I would think, right? Some might have more gifts in analytical reasoning. Some may have more gifts in creativity. Some may be brilliant on a basketball court, which means something. For goodness sake, it might mean more than anything else. Some are born with good looks. Some are born with, so with the capacity to love and to express love better than anyone else.
Yeah.
The thing is, let me just say, it seems to me, so nature is conspiring against equality, number one. Number two, the arguments against inequality seems to be for those who want a massive scheme of redistribution to the point of economic parity in the end, are suggesting that some advantages are unjust. And that's the kicker. How do we determine which advantages are unjust from which ones are just? And there's a third category.
I don't think
in terms of which advantages are morally neutral. That's a big question. Yeah. Now, when you talk about like John Rawls, he talked about he talked about actually in what we call the question of desert. That is in the question of who deserves what. That actually that which we are, the skills and the endowments that we are born with are morally neutral. That is to say that why should we be entitled or not entitled to it as a matter of the mere fact that we're born with them. Okay, there has to be, I guess some of the things he's suggesting is there has to be added reasons why we might take that which people are born with in order to level the playing field. Okay, and then there were great critics when Rawls in 1971 came out with the theory of justice. It's funny, from some people's eyes, they saw him as being a radical egalitarian, and from other people's eyes, they saw him as relatively inegalitarian. It's kind of weird, and supporting the idea of libertarianism. It's kind of strange.
Right.
Well, at least liberal democracy. And then he had his colleague at Harvard, Robert Nozick, who wrote Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and he wrote he wrote one book in response to Rawls that actually I think became more popular than Rawls' most seminal work in moral philosophy, at least since Immanuel Kant, right? Critique of Reason. And that is the idea that actually based on Lockean philosophy, that a lot of these redistribution schemes seem to amount to a unjustified taking of the labor of one for another. And so there we are. And so just basic question of what's just and what's unjust. Yeah, so what's just and unjust in terms of what we take from either individuals within a society and what we take from one nation for another nation, what should be reasonably expected in terms of what one should get, and what are the necessary obligations of one for the other. These are incredibly difficult questions.
About that, and just as Jordan Peterson would say, I mean, who are we to give like this power to some individuals that just come and take and say, they are morally superior than the average person.
Yeah.
What have we seen from that? We've seen societies like China, Russia, Vietnam, and Cuba.
Yeah.
I mean, now horrific examples.
That
follow this line. But just getting back to Sowell, he said also Rousseau, like many later believers in this invincible fallacy, believe that only human biases create inequalities.
Yeah.
Hold on. He said, and we're getting back to this. Don't get angry.
No,
Demography, cultural differences, and differences in the quantity and quality of parenting all vanish from this vision.
Yeah, of course.
In favor of one causal factor, for which many have imagined that they had a solution.
Yeah.
So, Sowell also talks in his book, he talks about a priority. We have priorities. Different cultures might have different priorities.
Yeah.
He talks about if someone gave you an empire, let's say your father passed and gave you a supermarket chain that was worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
But it meant nothing to you. It didn't mean anything to you. Your heart wasn't into it. You wanted to do something else. There would be another individual that it would mean so much more to than you, because this is something they love. Someone might be willing to pay $4 billion for it.
Yeah.
And maybe you would sell it to them so you could do what you want. But he talks about government control. If the government control, let's say, the supermarket, what does it mean to the government? It means nothing to them. Yeah. And what would the results be? Now I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. Almost there's a reason why, let's say, the first company in America was sponsored by the government. One of the first. They sold beaver hats, and the company failed. It failed because
you're talking about Harvard University. I think that was the first corporation in America.
No, I'm talking about a specific business that was selling beaver hats.
I think that was Astor. Wasn't that way that he made his wealth on pelts? John Astor.
Possibly.
Right? Yeah.
But it was.
That's why I think. Let me just say that's why I think.
The point I'm making is, hold on. That the government owned this company and it failed.
Okay. Yeah.
There's no profit margin. There was no incentive to do well. Go ahead.
No, I was just making a side there. Just a little trivia that actually, when you go to Greenwich Village, if you look at I forgot which stop it is, but one of the subway stops, it actually has an image of a beaver. I think that's in relation to John.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen that. I forget where.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So very interesting. So what I hate about these debates, I have to say, is that look. Okay, we might be biased here, but I don't think so, actually. I think I'm being fair, at this point in history, at least. Okay, maybe we can argue something differently about the dichotomy between the so-called left and right. Okay, that the right seems to actually welcome arguments on facts, okay, and makes logical connections between things that seem to be facts versus beliefs, okay, in a way that seems to be more reasonable than the left. I don't like the whole thing with the left and their game that they play with language, which is very Orwellian, okay, which is what was prognosticated a long time ago in the 1930s and 1940s by Huxley and Orwell and so on and so forth, that at some point will be this wonderful game of language that will end up in a newspeak that actually will cut short arguments in favor of their side relative to the other side. The other side being thought criminals and their side being so-called liberators, right? Right? Revolutionaries versus counter-revolutionaries. And what I don't like about these debates, at least from the perspective of the left, and I know the left very well because I was once a part of them, is that they eliminate they prevent actually certain arguments that actually are central, germane, if not central, to understanding in full these debates. For example, you bring up the question of culture, right? And if I can say, the choices that individuals make and the choices that collectives make. The choices that collectives make, one way to understand that choice is by what we term culture, or some sort of cultural orientation, which is based on the way people are morally educated, which is, say, in terms of the virtues and vices and certain principles, like their relation to certain types of work, certain dimensions of a work ethic. Right? I guess I can say it like that. But what's wrong with that? Why can't we say that? We're going to say in one of those mixed arguments, crowds, if you actually bring up the question of culture, I mean, that is the true third rail of political talk. And you'll be shouted down as being a racist or classist or so on and so forth, even a sexist. If you actually talk about human behavior. But how can you talk about human behavior and understand human behavior without talking about human behavior in the full? It makes no sense. Let me just give you an example, funny example that I just came up with, that I just heard. Yeah. That when Milton Friedman was going around, he was arguing about the virtues of the free market system relative to this growing, this rising tide of support, it seemed to be, at least for younger people who were very impressionable and quite idealistic. I have to give them credit for that. We were once part of that. maybe we still aren't to some degree, when they were supporting, so everything socialism had some sort of halo effect to it. Anyway, so actually some I guess Swede came up to Milton Friedman and said, but how do you explain the fact that in Sweden we have no poverty? Okay, that poverty is zero. And his response was, well, poverty is zero in the United States as well, amongst Swedish Americans. And the point is that it's not socialism that makes them work well, function well as society, but that there's a certain we-ness, as, what was it, Harry Eckstein, who talked about, from Princeton, who talked about, the wonders and the virtues of Scandinavian society. There's a certain unity to them, and a certain, what Rawls would say, well-orderedness amongst people of that Scandinavian stock. Okay, that actually make their culture work wonderfully, whether it's socialist or capitalist. And the funny thing is that when they experimented with socialism, as you could actually very easily tell us, that actually when they had that short-lived experiment with socialism, that people like Sanders and Warren keep pointing to, they're not so very much socialist anymore. The funny thing is, actually, they tried it and it didn't work out. That's the funny thing. That's the irony of it.
Once again, we had this video that we shot in France about this specifically. You can't compare the United States and, let's say, Sweden. They are a small country, homogeneous, number one, small country, number two, and free enterprise paid for their largesse socialist policies. Mm-hmm. They are, if you look at some of the lists that are out there mm-hmm. that talk about the freest economies in the world, mm-hmm. Sweden top 10, because it's normal to have business ownership, number one, and ownership of property. So they are very free in that sense. The second thing that no one talks about, Bernie fails to talk about, mm-hmm. is that the lower class, the poor, are taxed pretty high as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a pretty decent pool of tax money coming from all groups of earners. Yeah. Now, as we discussed in the 70s, they tried this new socialist policies, 70s and 80s. Sweden, before that, in the 60s, was the fourth richest country on the planet. Mm-hmm. It plummeted, lost half of its wealth, mm-hmm. and now it has changed its policies to make business mm-hmm. much more, less bureaucratic mm-hmm. and open to other businesses, and they are thriving again. Yeah. They even have free enterprise in hospitals, schools. People have vouchers. You have a choice for schools. So it's a sleight of hand, Bernie's comparison. I think his true objective or his true nirvana would be the country he supported many moons ago, 10 years ago, Venezuela. And look what happened. So,
goodness.
Societies just don't work.
Yeah, do you want to bring it back to the question of equality as so far as the view of Sowell is concerned? Do you want to give a synopsis?
I'm not going to. I just wanted to go through some things that he spoke about in the book.
Good. Yeah.
Once again, he talks about the prevailing social vision came as a more. We're talking 60s now. Let's say 60s. It was a prevailing social vision. Think about it, the civil rights era, with a more, this is a quote, with a more non-judgmental approach to behavior, as well as multiculturalism. That's a word we've been hearing a lot. A de-emphasis on policing and punishments, and an emphasis on demographically based fair shares for all. So, you could comment on this. The way people began to think changed in the civil rights movement, right?
Yeah.
What happened? It was carried out in policies that it was almost a form of, let's rebel against the government. The government owns us, owes us. It needs to fulfill its reparations. And there needs to be an excuse for bad behavior.
Yeah.
So all that, and then Sowell brings up a couple examples that he talks about. He talks about the public housing He says his aunt was admitted to public housing in the 1950s. And he said,
like our grandparents.
and he said his whole family. Now, it's not like you own a house in Scarsdale, but he said this was something significant.
Well, yeah, of course.
Air conditioning. She has heat.
Hey, Edenwald wasn't that bad, let me tell you, around Spelman. Okay, I'm just saying, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Public housing was an honor to be in the 50s. You know why? You had to have a steady job.
Yeah.
Came from a home that was a stable home, mother and father.
Yeah.
You had to prove that you were stable mentally, not mentally, but in a job. You had to prove that you could pay that rent.
Yeah.
And it was an honor to be there. I mean, we could talk about that in Co-op City. You had air conditioning. It was never an issue. The heat was always there. If a problem arose, Super came, fixed it up. So he talks about what happened. He talks about in the 50s, there was no air conditioning. People would sleep in the parks, Chris, all around Harlem, and sleep on the fire escapes.
Wow.
He talks about
there's something very romantic about that, I have to say, that mission.
Even up on the roof. You know, we heard the song, The Drifters, Up on the Roof.
Yeah, I wish I could have more experienced that moment, I have to say.
So Sowell talks about this, that growing up, there might have been one person that had a TV, I guess late 50s.
Yeah.
You know what they would do? The neighbor would leave the door open so you could come and watch TV when they weren't there.
Yeah.
What happened where crime was manageable then? He's not saying it was perfection, of course. We are human beings. But what happened? He talks about a retrogression in public housing that's riddled with crime, broken homes, violence, drugs, and cesspools of physical wreckage and social pathology.
Wow.
So what seeped in? I mean, we talk about Marxists and socialists invading the government and invading the church and perverting things that made America great, right?
Yeah.
Work ethic, family,
Yep.
values, morality. What happened?
So what was it? What do you think it was?
I think there was a rebellion against the law. There was a rebellion against the government, almost what they're conjuring up right now. You know, why do you have Antifa now talking about slavery from 180 years ago? The sins of America. There's never talk about.
So you think it was a cultural shift? That's you think?
Yeah, there's definitely a cultural shift.
Okay.
I mean, Sowell talks about. Once again, I'll give another example. He talks about the blackouts. You can relate to the blackouts. Were you born in 65? No, you were born later.
Nah, don't mention my age.
Okay.
Yeah, later.
He talks about a tale of blackouts.
Well, I remember the blackout in, what was it, in 77? I remember that one.
77. Listen to this.
Yeah.
He said the blackout in 65, there were numerous articles that said Americans band together.
Quite honestly, okay, I might as well. Actually, yes, that's actually why, one of the two theories on why, not just why I was named was because of the 1965 blackout. I tell you that story, my mother was pregnant, and she was caught in the subway. And they let her out of the subway while she was pregnant, and she ended up in St. Christopher's Church. And she said if she survives the night and gives birth to a boy, she'll name the boy Christopher. So there you go. Sorry, man.
Well, no, that's beautiful. I mean, I remember you said that. Yeah. But think about this. Sowell talks about the two blackouts. In 65, crime was lower than usual that day at a blackout.
Oh, yeah, really?
There were numerous articles that people are helping each other. People are going into homes with candles, escorting people.
Hard to believe. Wow.
Supplies.
Yeah.
Then he talks about, in reference, 1977.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
They called it the Night of Terror.
Yeah.
Crime was through the roof.
Yeah.
Okay. There was looting, arson.
Yeah.
I could recall that. I remember being 5 years old and recalling that. I remember stores being robbed. And just to get into our culture, I read a book about a famous DJ. He said many DJs were born that day because many of them stole equipment.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm not kidding.
Really? Oh, wow.
And many were born that day.
Oh, wow.
Getting
Awesome.
equipment that they didn't, couldn't pay for. Or,
That's crazy. Oh, my goodness.
So,
Wow. The Bronx is burning. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sowell says, what happened?
Yeah.
Our view of morality and crime changed.
Well, let me give you another terrible example. I think, was it one of Muhammad Ali's last fights? Was it that he had in Yankee Stadium? The semi-old Yankee Stadium? Do you remember that, around 1977? Do you remember that? Okay. Who was he fighting? Was it Spinks? No, it was Norton. It might have been Norton.
He fought Norton there, yeah.
Okay, so I guess it was Norton. And take a look at that, because actually, man, they said that actually, you had this terrible conflict between white and black, white, black, and brown, okay? And white people came into Yankee Stadium, by the skin of their teeth, and they left by the skin of their teeth. And a lot of fights broke out, and really it just emphasized that conflict in, I hate to say that, right? Well, shall we say that they came across this wave of inner city culture that really took root in America from around the late 1950s, through that time, and very much extended to today, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, even in the 70s, you could see it. It's on video. It might have been the World Series or the playoffs. The Yankees are playing, and the camera pans out onto the street.
Yeah.
And there was fire.
Cosell
says the Bronx is burning.
Burning, yeah.
A book written on that, and
many books.
So
I think there's a movie out, maybe.
Burning. Yeah. So
let me tell you, there was no exaggeration. Growing up in the Bronx around that time, that almost every day that you could smell burnt buildings, and you could see fires in the distance. People would just those were not accidents. Some might be.
No, there was.
Poor safety. The landlords were torching, as a matter of incentive, were torching their properties to collect the insurance. What a wicked thing to do.
They were paying kids off to do that as well. Someone came out with a documentary how the Latins, and I guess African Americans as well, at that time rebuilt the South Bronx, because I have to look at that. There was a middle class flight. They burned these, but my father's office was on 149th and 3rd.
Oh, wow.
So I think he had his office in the late 70s. So I could recall the spillage of the blackout. Like, there were coats all over, like people were selling stuff outside, and I saw the buildings burning.
Oh, wow.
Very scary. It was like a war zone.
Yeah. Maybe we should wind it down and maybe stop on this note here. Do you have like a last comment to say about Sowell? And then we'll pick up, because we should really get into more in depth about the question of justice in relation to equality, and then we can talk more in depth on what happened with respect to, I guess what we're trying to say is the war on poverty. That's what we should talk about at some point in depth.
Well, yeah, I just want to give a couple more examples. Sowell says the line of defense for this behavior is morality. But when you delegitimize morality, what do you have? You have nothing but the police to enforce this. Yeah. So he says he compares the adults, let's say, who were in the 60s, who, survived the Great Depression or World War II. Yeah. They had a different sense and possible respect for America, a gratitude of being here, despite experiencing the Depression, the war, poverty, as opposed to those growing up in the 60s. The whole movement was, anti-war, anti-American, and putting it down. There was a rebellious attitude towards the system and authority. And Sowell, once again, gives another example. There was an exchange buffet restaurants, about 75 of them in New York City. And these buffet restaurants, Chris, you probably went to one. I think Bagel Nosh was kind of like that, where we would go with your father.
Yeah, I think I got a few food poisoning a couple of times from them. But go ahead.
But you would go get your food, sit down, have cake, sandwich, coffee, a drink, and then you would tell the cashier what you had. So it was on an honor system in many ways.
Yeah, sure.
He said those restaurants lasted for 75 years.
Wow.
But in the 60s and 70s, they died out. So Sowell says, what happened? Obviously, people were lying about what they consumed.
Oh my goodness, really?
Like Foreman might have had 3 pieces of cake. He had only one. And a napkin. I don't know.
Yeah, he was like John Belushi. He was eating on his way to the cash register.
Right. He says people were no longer honest.
Yeah.
And that's what occurred. And then he says he brings up a parallel with England, that England was known for self-control.
Yeah.
Society that was observant of the law.
Yeah.
And he brings up George Orwell. He said he recalls after World War II, there were 200,000 Englishmen celebrating the victory in World War II.
Yeah.
And he said there was no problems. Everyone got along.
Yeah.
There was no violence.
Yeah.
And so fast forwards to the year 2000, and you're having all these riots in England.
Unbelievable.
What happened there?
Yeah.
What happened there? But he said the mentality of what is normal and what is acceptable has changed. And
that's very interesting. So I like those examples because we seem to be getting a little bit out of the question of associating bad behavior with certain races or a certain race. Okay, well that's good because bad behavior is an equal opportunity employer, right? And so is good behavior. That's what we're saying. I think it's wonderful. For example, very interesting that actually in France, where I am, many of the churches, particularly in Paris, are filled with people from Africa, and many of the priests, the clergy, are from Africa, and they're very, very beautiful people. Well, it's a wonderful thing, you know. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It's people buying into the system and being acclimated with what is the norm.
So what happened is that the things that we seem to be saying then, what majorly happened was we could say certain practices and certain institutions that impacted people's behavior for the worse. One of which is the destruction of the family. It has to be that we're saying here, right? And the loss of the church, whether or not God exists or not, but the idea that we need God either way, as who said that? Yeah, right. So many people said that. Okay, I think Voltaire said that,
he did say something along those lines. That
and Pascal said that, and I'm sure Leibniz said that, and the rest. Okay, right. But there you go. Yeah. So anyway, the idea that the church is an institution that was a central part in our lives, that was a central pillar of health in our community, that actually gave way before what? Through self-gratifying, self-seeking behavior, is that what we're saying? Or maybe groupthink that led people in another direction, one of which the other organizing force, it seems to be, bringing home this whole argument, is actually the organizing force of the so-called social justice warrior in relation to, primarily just really means, in the end, cultural Marxism and all that entails. The idea that morality is just a function of one's will, right? Or the culture itself, that there isn't anything transcendent above or beyond human will and human society, that is actually necessary for us to respect in terms of our obligations to ourselves, if not to the Creator himself. Yeah.
What do you have to live for if there's no basis of you?
And that seems to slide then into certain, philosophies about pleasure seeking, what we might call, hedonism, and and there's certain degrees of hedonism. Okay,
living your best
all the way, in the worst case scenario, selfishness and the alienation that goes with. On the other side of the spectrum, which is equally bad, seems to me that herd mentality and just following people because you want to be part of the group and you don't have the capacity to fight against the will of the group, which is all wrong, right? Our position is that actually questions of truth and questions of morality and questions of virtue are things, certain aspects of which one could articulate as being outside of human expression, of human will, right? Even human desire. Okay, but there you go. These are the things that happen here, okay? The destruction of the church, the loss of the fear of God, the idea that actually morality is perfectly relative, right? That nothing is necessary. But the weird thing is that the Marxists, they undermine their own argument by offering something that actually is beyond human will, and that is actually the one thing that they don't want to question, which is the idea that in the end we're all supposed to end up socioeconomically equal, or more or less equal, right? Far more so than they are today. But how can they posit that without offering something that's transcendent to culture? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, we'll get into that in more detail later. Yeah.
One more thing. Sowell talks about England in 1954.
Yeah.
He said it was very easy to get a gun in 1954.
Yeah.
He said there was a total of 12 armed robberies in London.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 1981, there were 1,400.
Oh my goodness!
And if we go to 1991, it was 1,600.
Oh my
now,
goodness!
We've been talking about poverty. There's no denying
that
London and Britain is much richer now, 1991, as opposed to 1954, right after the war.
Yeah, sure.
So why the retrogression?
Right.
What occurred? You know, why the social degradation?
Yeah.
What had happened? But you just said it in many ways. And I like to give out these facts because it backs up these arguments, you know.
No.
We hear people saying, oh, times were always bad or it's always like that. No, these are facts, factual claims that you can hold and embrace. And we need to examine the social pathology and what these people are thinking. What has occurred in these societies. There was a Singaporean prime minister, Hu Wang, actually. I know it sounds funny. But he went to England right after World War II and he was studying. He said he was shocked how polite the English were.
Really?
How, this is what he said. How reserved they were. These were the Brits who were just living right after World War II. And he said he could recall bomb plots, places that were bombed out, and they were lined with flowers. And the Brits had nothing but optimism. You know, they were content about the future. He said, go to a place that you would buy a newspaper, Chris. The newspaper would be on the outside. And there was a change box. You just put the change in a box and take a newspaper.
I remember that, but I remember growing up in New York, it was like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Don't you remember that?
I remember the machines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Machines. Well, this is a little box where the change is exposed.
So really? Oh, my goodness.
And he says he recalls that he was stymied by how trustworthy they were, you know.
Well, now fast forward now because, you know, I spent many years in England, so I can tell you about England. The primary form of expression is more or less summed up in, you know, F off. Everything is F off. You know, it's terrible. Terrible. Oh, goodness.
So Sowell talks about the new social vision and the attitudes towards law and order change. Then Sowell brings up another example, a retrogression. He says there was a famous soccer match in the 50s, and the match was tied. This was in Britain. And the Brits lost on a last-second goal in the 50s. And what did the British team do? They applauded the team that came in and won in a fair way. They said, wow, that was an amazing...
That's not the Britain that I know. Trust me, man. They would have caved their heads in. Yeah.
He talks about the retrogression. And
they would have tossed a couple of pints their way and they would have beat them to a pulp, man, you know? I mean, now the big thing is actually to, you know, go to enemy territory, right? One city to another, or parts of London, you know, Chelsea, or where Tottenham is, or Arsenal, and they'll take over their pub. You know that? They take over the pub and they toss them out. That's the big thing. You like that? It's kind of fun, actually.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they do that. And they do the same thing when they go to and they play in Turkey and they play in Italy, and you know, and the hooligans are huge, you know.
He talks about the hooligans who go to other countries. And there's signs in Germany and Spain, beware of these guys, and they get into fights.
Yeah, sure.
And not that they're poor because they're paying for trips to go.
Yeah, no way.
Something has changed. This was once the country of restraint and respect, and you know, these things are commonplace now, you know.
Yeah.
He even talks about the vulgar insults of the hooligans in Britain and Australia. They're famous now, as
Yeah.
we know.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
Orwell, just give you a quote by Orwell in the 40s.
Yeah.
Orwell always stated that the masses in Britain
Yeah.
believe that the law is the right thing to follow. That, and then he compares the British way of thinking to the Spaniard or the Italian, who might be more inclined to break the law in the 40s, but that was forbidden in England.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Amazing.
or how about this? We could agree with this. Sowell even talks about, you can relate to this.
Yeah.
Kids who get good grades in Britain were beaten up. That happens in New York, or it's happened.
Well, sure.
You could relate to that in Co-op City.
Yeah, sure.
Almost,
Yeah,
there
sure.
was a retrogression with some people who almost celebrated doing poorly
Yeah,
or
yeah.
failing.
But we were dressed up nicely on our way to Catholic school, and let me tell you, we're just a target for all the other schools around us, man. And we could talk
that
about
happened to me.
We talked about it on the other podcast, but
Right.
yeah, I guess we could talk about that again later in more detail. But yeah, it was terrible.
Right.
It was like, yeah, we just, like, we had a sign on our back that said, stick these kids up.
You remember that? You were.
Yeah, we were victims of predators, man. Predator culture, man, I have to say. First day at school, I'll never get at Spelman.
First day?
First day at school, I told you. I told the story so many times, I feel, okay, let's put it on the record, okay? But yeah, we were like all hanging out at the bus stop, little freshmen, with the ties. Yeah, exactly. And we're hanging out, and the brothers came up. I hate to say that. And they were trying to kick it to the girls, the Catholic school girls, and then everyone was going on the bus, a little nervous. We went on the bus, and we thought we got away from the situation, and then out of nowhere, which is quite an amazing athletic feat, okay? Something that actually Michael Jordan would envy. But a punch came through the window as the bus is driving. The bus is pulling away. A fist came out of nowhere through the window and connected perfectly in someone's eye. And as the bus is pulling away, I saw the eye just get red, and bigger, and just grow and grow until it covered his whole face.
Horrific.
And he's crying like your brother. Yeah, terrible, man. I think we should end on that note. What do you think?
All right, I wanted to add more on Sowell, but okay.
Well, we should come back because I'm afraid that we're going to have a podcast a little bit too busy. Sound good?
Yep.
But I think we can just summarize this in terms of the notion of slouching to Gomorrah. An idea that whether God exists or not, we certainly would say that God does exist, but we can offer that as an argument later. That certainly that there's something wonderful about the virtues that are delineated in great books like the Gospels, okay, and also the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and woe unto those who don't respect the pillars of civilization.
Those are Marxists.
Yeah.
Because everything that the Ten Commandments says is about coveting thy neighbor, coveting thy goods, and
that essentially, if you play with the devil, you're going to get the devil. Okay,
right.
Now you could take that metaphorically, or you could take it in terms of reality, or you could take it in both ways. I would take it in both ways. You play with the devil, you get burnt. Anyway, good.